It's the internet. You're busy. I'm Jeff Grubb. I write for GamesBeat.com. Let's review the Xbox Series X. Xbox Series X is launching for $500 on November 10th. And for that money, the company is promising the most powerful Xbox ever. And I think the idea is to deliver games in the range of 4K resolutions and 120 frames per second. And a few games are going to hit both of those. But I think that a lot of games will get in the range of one or the other, or at least, like 1800p with 60 frames per second. And that's going to be good enough. It's going to be a big difference. And I'll say, let me start by saying the Xbox Series X is going to stand in really stark contrast to the last generation of consoles, what is now the last generation of consoles, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Those systems had a lot of great games. You'll never hear me deny that. I am feeling stronger and stronger about my assessment that they did a very poor job of presenting those experiences, though. The Xbox One and PS4, they're slow and clumsy and often very loud. The Xbox Series X is the opposite of those things. It is speedy and responsive and whisper quiet. It's the kind of console that makes me happy to play console games again. But if the question is, should you get an Xbox Series X right now, that's going to depend on you and a variety of other factors. Do you care about exclusives? Do you play Xbox One every day already? We'll get into all of that. Let's dig into the details. And I hope by the end of this, we'll be able to answer that question for you. Should you get one? Reviewing a console is an odd business. We tend to judge platforms based on their software, but the point of a new console is that it's launching from scratch with effectively zero games. A few might show up at launch, but that's not a large enough sample size to determine the future of the software library overall. And yet, it is the most important determining factor for most people when it comes to purchasing console hardware. With that in mind, I'm going to try to speak to what you can expect from games on the Xbox Series X, but keep in mind, I'm doing it from trying to predict the future. It's going to be difficult, but let's talk about it. Let's start with backward compatibility. This is an undeniable strength of the Xbox Series X. As someone who loves PC gaming, I know that new hardware is often more about seeing how much better your old games can run. The Series X taps into that by unleashing all of its extra horsepower on Xbox, Xbox 360, and Xbox One games. In almost every case, this leads to faster loading times. In many other games, you also get higher frame rates and render resolutions. Some games will continue to run the same way on the new Xbox as they did on the old Xbox. That's because developers often set performance profiles for console games that do not scale dynamically. This leads to situations where a game could run better, but it doesn't. For its part, Microsoft says that it's looking for ways to improve even locked games without forcing developers to go back and create updates specifically for each title. But this is something we haven't seen in action yet. It's just a hypothetical right now, and we know that companies tend to make a lot of promises that they don't follow through on later in the generation. I'm not necessarily skeptical of this particular one, but I'm also not in the mood to take Microsoft or Sony's word on anything until they actually deliver the things that they say they're going to deliver. Then we have optimized games, which feel almost like free remasters. Old games don't have to run in a backward compatible mode. Developers can specifically update them to run natively on Xbox Series X, and this comes with even more advantages. Loading times should be even faster, and some games, like Gears 5, now run at 120 frames per second instead of 60. For now, these optimized games don't feel like they live up to the remaster moniker that publishers use to resell old games, but Xbox Series X optimizations come as free updates, so Gears 5 doesn't feel quite like Gears 5 Remastered, but it's close enough, especially for the price, and also especially considering this game just came out, so a remaster just a couple years later wouldn't feel that different anyhow. This also keeps things simple for anyone who's looking to upgrade in the future. Microsoft's smart delivery system ensures that you get the best version of game no matter where you play it. So if you want to play Cyberpunk 27 when or if it comes out this year, but you're waiting to get new hardware, there's no reason to hesitate. The Xbox One version of Cyberpunk will turn into the Xbox Series X version for you whenever you do pull the trigger on a new console purchase. Every Microsoft game uses smart delivery. A lot of big name third party releases are going to use it as well, but not every publisher will. That's going to ruin the simplicity of the whole idea behind the system, which is, you don't have to think about it. You buy a game, it's going to work on your Xbox Series X, no matter where else in the Xbox ecosystem you bought it. That's not really the case, and it's because of companies outside of Microsoft's control. I think Microsoft made the right decision in not forcing publishers to do this, to sort of create a I drank your milkshake sort of situation where they surround these companies that are unwilling to do this and make it so that these other companies look silly and bad by comparison, and eventually will change. But for now, if you're buying games from 2K or EA, there's a strong chance that they won't support smart delivery, and you'll have to either buy a more expensive version of the game, or there will be some other caveat that you'll have to consider. A thing I hear a lot from people is that consoles are really only worth getting for their exclusives. And I think that's probably true for a certain kind of gamer. And if that's you, then you should absolutely wait for the Xbox Series X. If you ever plan to show up to the Xbox to play Halo or eventual releases like Avowed or some big, maybe Bethesda game that is exclusive to Xbox, then wait for those games to actually come out before you buy the hardware. There's no point otherwise. I don't really think I need to tell you that, but I'm saying it just to be as comprehensive as possible. If you are happy to play exclusives but spend most of your time in multi-platform releases like Fortnite, FIFA, or dozens of other games, though, the Series X isn't just a viable option. It is potentially the obvious choice thanks to its services. Game Pass really is that killer app. Exclusives are still rare on Xbox Series X, and you have to factor in that into your decision when you're spending $500 on hardware. Can you get by playing games on your current hardware, or are you definitely getting a PlayStation 5, or do you have a solid gaming PC? In all of those situations, it's easy to skip the Xbox Series X hardware and instead just stick with Game Pass on an older Xbox on PC, or even over the cloud on Android. But in all of those situations, Game Pass is just as good of a reason to still get an Xbox Series X. That this Netflix of game style subscription is an undeniable deal at $10 per month or $15 for its ultimate variation that includes Game Pass on PC, consoles, as well as EA Play, Xbox Live Gold, and cloud streaming. With Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, you can buy a $500 console and have a beefy library of games ready to go immediately. Even if you're someone who loves building up a collection of physical media unlike your PlayStation, Game Pass creates a low risk, complementary method for trying a lot of new games in different genres on a different system. If you want, you can then buy those games physically for another platform or cancel Game Pass at any time and then come back to it when you're ready to try more games or have more time. Especially if you like a big PlayStation exclusives coming out, you're going to play that for a long time. Forget Game Pass and then just come back to the Microsoft ecosystem when you're ready. It's really low touch and could fit in really well with people who consider themselves Nintendo or PlayStation gamers first. With the business strategy of Xbox Game Pass, Xbox as an ecosystem makes sense for so many more people. Even as a console, it makes sense for such a wider potential audience. If I had a friend or a family member come up to me and say, "Hey, Jeff, what console should I get? What new next gen console should I get?" I would ask them a lot of questions. I would want to make sure I know what their tastes are like. But Game Pass does make me want to lean towards Xbox, especially as cross platform multiplayer uh, becomes more and more of a standard. So you don't have to, I don't, normally my answer used to be go where your friends are going. If you have friends that play online, if you have friends that play console games at all, and you think one day they might play an online game that might come along, then you should get that console that they're playing on. And now that is less of a concern than ever before. And so, yeah, so Game Pass makes me want to say, hey, there is a Netflix style thing where I know you're not going to be the kind of person that's going to build up a huge physical library of games. You're going to treat games the way most of us treat movies and music now. And Xbox is the best place for that. The obvious exception, of course, is any friend or family who does express that they have certain tastes that match up with the prestige first party exclusive titles that you can really only get from Sony right now. And in that case, it'd be like, well, Game Pass isn't going to help you with that. But let's not talk about the potential wider audience. That's not who's watching this video. I know who you are. You are probably someone who plays games every day. And if you play on a console every day, if you're not someone who only shows up for big marquee exclusives occasionally or checks in on one game a year, um, you have to upgrade. I'm sorry, but you have to upgrade. Especially if you play an Xbox One every day, you have to upgrade. Okay, I know that's hyperbole, but really, I feel pretty strongly that I want you to stop playing games on that busted last gen hardware. Uh, the quality of life improvements provided by the Xbox Series X over the Xbox One or PlayStation 4, that makes the upgrade worth it on its own. On those systems, you spend so much time in loading screens and in boot screens. Series X mitigates, minimizes, and eliminates that stuff to a large extent. And that's without getting into the benefits of the games running better. If you play Sea of Thieves every day on an Xbox One, stop listening to this video, stop watching, come back, but stop. Go try to find an Xbox Series X and buy that right now. You deserve better. You deserve a game that runs at 60 frames per second, which that game now does on Xbox Series X. It is buttery smooth and twice as frames. You're going to get twice as many frames in the same amount of time playing on Xbox Series X. Please stop denying yourself. Go out and get the next gen. While games are crucial when assessing a console, I think we could still find value in talking about the device itself and the hardware inside of that. The Xbox Series X is powerful and speedy, and that comes down to the next gen GPU, CPU, and SSD storage that is inside of it. And all of that works thanks to top notch engineering and cooling and the overall architecture. A console in 2020 should feel at least as responsive as a high-end smartphone. They might not cost as much, but they're much bigger. They have active cooling. They are built to last for many more years than a smartphone. You should never have to wait trying to swipe into another part of the interface on your phone, and most phones you don't. And you shouldn't have to wait trying to swipe into another part of the interface on your console either. And Xbox Series X works exactly that way. The benefits of the hardware don't end at the UI. Games also load in much faster thanks to the CPU, SSD, and the connecting hard architecture. This isn't exclusively due to the hardware. Microsoft also has its own direct storage API that enables the GPU to bypass the CPU when calling specific data from the SSD. But developers will have to build their games for direct storage to take advantage of that. That means loading times should get even faster as we move deeper into the generation. Xbox Series X's Quick Resume feature may bypass the need for lengthy initial loads entirely, though. Microsoft has made a big deal out of this system, and for good reason. It's something a closed console system can do that a PC would struggle with. Quick Resume works by holding a partition on the SSD with enough space to save states for at least 4 games. So if you're playing through Assassin's Creed Valhalla on your own, you can leave it to join your friends for a multiplayer session in Fortnite, Call of Duty, and then Rocket League. Then when you return to Valhalla, the game will be waiting for you when you return. Quick Resume works if you turn the Xbox off or even unplug it, but it's also not something you have to manage. It happens automatically. That also means you cannot choose to keep a particular game in Quick Resume if you want. The system decides when it needs to push a certain save state out of storage, but this also means it mostly just works, especially with the way most people tend to play games. One factor that Microsoft seems almost afraid of touching in its messaging about the Xbox Series X is this console is now an excellent way to watch TV and video and movies. It's a meme with the Xbox One.
TV and movies? TV. Xbox. Watch TV. 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 TV.
So Microsoft isn't doing that this time, and yet a lot of people still use their consoles to watch Netflix and Hulu and Prime Video or whatever else. And I've always found that experience to be pretty suboptimal on the PS4 or the Xbox One. I use them still because it's easy because a lot of times they're already on. That way you pop over to Netflix, especially on this TV over here. We use the Xbox One S with the kids. But loading up Netflix, going from like if they want to go from like one show to another, and that show's from like Netflix over to Prime Video, it takes like a minute or two to like go from one and load up the other. On Xbox Series X, video apps feel a lot more like they do on an iPhone. Opening the Netflix app takes seconds, as does loading in its content. If I want to bounce out to the menu, it's simple to get right back in and continue my show from where I left off. It happens in an instant. Now, Xbox won't save your position in a show in Quick Resume because that doesn't really make sense. Quick Resume is going to save your position, your state in a game in memory, well, in storage on your SSD in a partition. And a show is coming in from the cloud if you're watching on like Netflix or Prime Video. And so it doesn't make sense, like, especially if you're going to turn off the Xbox, that connection is going to be lost. Netflix isn't going to save this thing that's in your Quick Resume. It doesn't even know that thing exists. So that doesn't really make sense. But it also doesn't really matter because the experience is so much faster on this new hardware that I would bounce back between Prime Video and Netflix, and a couple other services, and it was so fast that it was picking up my shows almost as if I was using Quick Resume. It made no real difference. I like the way the Xbox Series X looks, at least in its vertical position, which is obviously how the designers intended for you to use it. On its side, that is absurd. I think that looks pretty absurd. No doubt about it. And I'll say this about it. I think it's at least interesting in how ugly it is on its side, or at least it stands out. Ugly might be too strong. I don't think the Xbox Series X or the PS5 are ugly. I just think they have the gaudy things about them in certain ways that make them stand out. And that might be a problem in some cases where you don't want these things to draw your eye. Vertically, this thing's going to look cool. It's not gonna stand out, I don't think, very much. It blends in. On its side, it is going to stand out. It is going to draw your eye, and I think that's a little bit of a failing. But the bigger failing is that it is big enough that you won't really get to decide how you place it into your entertainment center or whatever the furniture that holds consoles is called these days. Um, you're going to have to fit it in however it can fit. Probably won't be vertically, I think, for a lot of people. You might have to do it on its side. And if you don't like the way it looks on its side, well, I don't think you're going to go out and buy new furniture just to fix that. And that is a little bit of a failing of the design here. I will say at least it's not nearly as big as even the smallest gaming PCs. I have an NZXT H1 case for my gaming PC up next to my TV upstairs. This thing looks miniature next to that, and that is like a mini ITX case. Microsoft clearly designed the Xbox Series X form factor to prioritize cooling, and for me, that is more than a fair trade. Trade the looks and the feel and the design, whatever, in terms of getting better cooling performance. I can barely care that this thing does look goofy on its side. It does look goofy. I barely care about that. Only when I occasionally look over and see it on its side would it ever bother me. I deeply care that I have never really heard the fans spin up in this thing to a point where, I mean, I don't think I've never really noticed them, but I've especially never noticed them during gameplay. And the boxy design, that is what's working here. It's got to be tall. It's got to be this tall on its side so that the giant fan that is the size of this inside of here can fit and slowly spin, and yet at the same time move out a ton of air. It is just overall really a smart idea. It's a fair trade, and you won't actually be looking at your console when you're playing games. But if you could hear this thing, you wouldn't be able to turn that off. You would absolutely notice that. We know this from, the PS4 Pro is the most notorious example. But even the Xbox One X, now that I've used this thing, that gets a little bit loud compared to this thing. So I'll take it. The Xbox Series X is so good, I do think you should get one. Just maybe not right away. If you do pick one up at launch, or you get it early next year, or you wait until a big exclusive comes along that you want to play, or you wait till the price drops a few years from now and you pick one up then. No matter what situation you're in where you find yourself coming into ownership of an Xbox Series X, you're going to end up with a great way to play games. Even if you have a really powerful PC that can play the Microsoft exclusives, and can subscribe to Game Pass, the Series X is going to work better with televisions, and it's going to be a great multimedia box. And at $500, that's good. That's fair. But if you're hearing me say all these good things and you're feeling that FOMO, that fear of missing out, don't. Microsoft didn't design the Series X in such a way to make you feel like you're missing out if you wait. If it's how you want to play games, the company did an excellent job ensuring that the Xbox Series X is great for you for that purpose. If you only come to the Xbox ecosystem for Halo or a handful of other exclusives, however, the console is unnecessary. Subscribe to Game Pass and then play those games on an Android or on or on the PC. You could do it over the cloud or you could do it natively over a PC. Those are your options. Um, the only thing that Microsoft wants you to feel like you're missing out on is its services. And so and the Series X is very much designed to emphasize that. This is an option. It's not, it doesn't want to make you feel like Microsoft doesn't ever want to make you feel like, oh, if I don't have an Xbox Series X, there's no point in subscribing to Game Pass. That is the position it's working from. And I think that's an important point to emphasize. When we look at all the bells and whistles of the PlayStation 5 as like the direct competitor here. And it's like, man, that stuff all feels like next gen. We don't know if those things will matter in the long run. They might. I hope they do. I'm the person who used 3D on the 3DS all through that life system. Everyone talked about turning it off to save battery. That was never me. I love the gimmicks. I do. But we don't know if developers will love them enough to see them through and actually deliver on them. Um, and Microsoft, I think, made a conscious decision here not to do anything like that because they don't want you to feel like you're missing out if you don't get the Xbox Series X. If you don't get the Xbox Series X, you are still invited to the Xbox party. It's on Game Pass. You could still play it on your old Xbox. You could play it on the phone. You could play it on the PC. So then what's the goal of the Xbox Series X? It is to just make sure that once you have it, once you own it, you're going to really love using it. It is a good way to access the content in Game Pass, the thing that you actually don't want to miss out on. And I think if that was the goal, they nailed it. They absolutely crushed it. I think that if you see that, you hear all that, and you're like, well, I don't feel like getting one right now. Don't. Please don't. You don't have to. You don't have to. That's the whole point. That's good. And then it's up to Microsoft to deliver the games to make you want to get Game Pass. And then once you have Game Pass, you're like, if I had an Xbox Series X, it would be even easier to play these really great games that I'm enjoying and play them in a really high quality on my TV without having to worry about my bandwidth on my internet. Uh, yeah, that's the whole idea. Again, I think that makes it difficult to feel good about spending $500 on an Xbox Series X right now. But once you own it, it is very easy to fall in love with this system. Okay, that's going to do it for me. I'm Jeff Grubb. I write for GamesBeat. Find this review there. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I think we're going to have some stuff on the PS5 very soon. I'm working with Mike on that. You can find that on this channel as well. Find that on gamesbeat.com as well. All right. Got to go put this whole thing together. Thank you for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. If you made it this far, find me on Twitter. Ask me any questions in the comments here. If you have any questions, if you want to see specific videos about the Xbox Series X and you have a question about how it works, ask me. I should also hopefully have an Xbox Series S review going up around the same time as this. If you have any questions about that, ask that there. Short version is, it's probably not for you if you're watching this video, but I think it has its purpose. I think it's going to serve an audience that is going to come along here, not right away, but in the next year or so, and then after that. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. Have a good one. Until next time, goodbye.